In this video, we'll look at how to use algorithmic variables across multiple questions. We can share variables by placing them in a preface and assigning that preface to individual questions. We won't be going in depth about how to create variables. See the Algorithmic Basics video for an overview of creating variables. In this example, I have 3 questions that ask students to calculate the mean, median, and mode for a series of grades. I have a preface named Test Scores that has a text scenario and 6 grades. These grade values are algorithmic and can be recalculated. The Test Scores preface is assigned to the 3 questions, and each of those questions uses the values in the preface to calculate the answer options. Let's start by looking at the preface and the grade variables. I've already created the preface. Let's look at what I've created. We'll start by selecting the Set menu. Then we'll select Prefaces. In the Prefaces dialog box, if we were creating the preface, we would click New. In this example, I've created the preface and its variables in advance. Let's click the Edit link and look at the variables I've created. I've named this preface Test Scores. If you just want to have variables that you can use in multiple questions, you can create a preface that contains variable definitions and no text. If you assign the preface to a question, that question will be able to use the preface variables. In this example, however, I have some introductory text and have inserted the grade variables into the text. Let's take a look at the different variables I've created. We'll start by clicking the Tools menu. Then we'll select Variable Definitions. The first 5 grade variables all work the same way. These variables select a random number between 60 and 100. They use the range function, which selects a random number from the minimum and maximum you specify. In one of the questions, I'm going to ask the students to calculate the mode of this list of grades. For them to calculate the mode, 2 of the grades have to be the same. So, the grade 6 variable is a little different. Let's click Edit and see how it works. For the grade 6 variable, I want to choose one of the other 5 grade values and set grade 6 to that. The variable uses the choose function, which allows you to select items from a list. The first parameter specifies which item to select from the list. After the first parameter is the list of values to choose from. In the first parameter, I've entered rand 5. This will select a random number between 1 and 5. Then, I've entered the 5 names of my variables. So this expression will select a number between 1 and 5, and then select the corresponding grade variable from the list and set the grade 6 variable to that value. Notice that grade 6 and grade 4 have the same value. This shows us that the grade 6 variable is doing what we want. There's one other variable we need to look at. It's called preface and it's a condition instead of a variable. Let's click Edit and look at what it does. Notice first that the type is a condition instead of a variable. Conditions are algorithmic expressions that must evaluate to true when a question is recalculated. If any condition in a question does not evaluate to true, the question is recalculated again. For a question, I don't want any of the grade variables to have the same value except grade 6. I've used the function called isUnique to do this. In the arguments for the function, I've entered the names of all the grade variables except for grade 6. This function compares all the values of the grade variables I've entered. If the values are all different, then the function will return true, because the values are unique. If any of the values for the first 5 grade variable are the same, the function will return false. Since I have this function in a condition, it has to be true. So, if it is false, the system will recalculate the grade variables in the condition until they all have unique values. If the system cannot come up with unique values, I'll receive an error. Those are the variables I've created in the preface. When I assign this preface to a question, I'll have access to all of these variables from within the question. I've inserted all of my grade variables into the text of the preface. Now that I have my preface, let's look at how I can use it to create some questions. Next, we'll assign the preface to a new question and create the question-specific variables. I want 3 multiple choice questions to go along with the preface I've created. One that asks about the mean, one that asks about the median, and another that asks about the mode. Let's click the New Question button and write the first question. The first thing I'm going to do before I write the question is to assign the preface we created to this question. To do that, I have to go to the Info tab. We'll click the Preface dropdown, and then select the Test Scores preface that we created earlier. Now, let's go back to the Question tab. This first question will ask the students to calculate the mean. I'm going to reduce the number of choices to 3. For my answer options, I want one answer to be the mean, another to be the median, and the third to be the mode. Let's create the corresponding variables for those answers. We'll start by selecting the Tools menu, and then we'll click Variable Definitions. Notice that we already have variables in the Variable Definitions dialog box for this question. These are the variables we created in the preface. Because we assign that preface to this question, we have access to those variables and can use them in new variables we create for this question. Let's create our first variable for this question. I'll begin by creating my variable for the mean. I'll call it grade mean. There is already a mean function, so I can use that to calculate the value for this variable. The function consists of the name of the function and then a list of values you want to use for the calculation. In this case, I've typed the names of the 6 grade variables from the preface. So this variable will take the values of those variables and calculate the mean. I'm going to change the number of decimal places to 2. Then I'll click the Test button to be sure I've typed everything correctly and that the result looks right. This looks okay, and there are no errors. So I'll click OK. Now that I've added a variable to the question, we can see that variables from the preface are bold. This is helpful if we need to change something. It's easy to see if we can edit the variable in the question or if we have to go to the preface. Next, we'll add the variable for the median value. I'll name the variable grade median. There is a built-in median function that we can use to calculate the value for our grade median variable. The syntax is the same as the mean function, so we just need to put the names of the grade variables in the parentheses after the function name. Like my first variable, I'm going to change the decimal places to 2. We'll test the variable to be sure we've typed everything properly. There are no errors, so I'll click OK. Now we'll create the variable that will calculate the mode. We'll name it grade mode. We'll use the built-in mode function to calculate the value based on our grade variables. I'll set the decimal places to 2. We'll test it, and then click OK to save it. Just like the preface, I'm going to create a condition that ensures that all the answer variables I've created are unique. I'll name it QuestUnique. I'll select Condition from the Type dropdown. I'll use the isUnique function again. This time, I put the names of the 3 question variables I created into the function. We'll test it and verify that it's working. I'll click OK to save it. We now have all the variables we need for our question. We'll click OK in the Variable Definitions dialog and start inserting the variables into the text of the question. Next, we'll type the names of our variables into the answer options, enclosing them in double pound signs. Now, let's recalculate the variables to place the names of the variables into the questions and to ensure that we didn't make any typos entering the information. What I typed has been replaced by the variable names, so I know I entered everything correctly. Since this question asks for the mean value, and the mean variable is answer A, we don't need to do anything in the answer dropdown. Let's click the Preview tab and look at what the question looks like with the variables in it. These values look good, so we can click OK. Since we're going to use all the same variables for the median question, I'm simply going to duplicate this question and change the text and the correct answer. I'll click the pencil menu next to the question and click Duplicate. Then, I'll edit the new question. I'm going to change the word mean to median in the question title and the text of the question. And I'm also going to delete the word copy at the end of the question title as well. Since the question is asking for the median and that variable is answer B, I'll select B from the answer dropdown and click OK to save my changes. To create our third question, I'll do the same thing I did to create the second question. Duplicate the last question, change the text of the new question, and change the answer. I'll change median to mode in the question text and title. And change the answer to C. I'll click OK to save this final question. Now we have 3 algorithmic questions sharing the same preface and its variables. Finally, let's recalculate the variables in this set to see how this all works. Before we do that, it's important to remember that creating algorithmic prefaces and questions is like programming. Therefore, you should recalculate individual variables multiple times when you create them. You should recalculate questions as you add variables to them. And you should recalculate sets and tests after the content is complete. This all helps reduce the likelihood of errors. Before we recalculate our set, let's just look at the values in the preface and the first question so we're familiar with them. To recalculate all the variables, we'll start by selecting the Set menu, and then click Recalculate All Algorithms. We can see that the values in the preface changed as well as the values in the question, which are based off the variables in the preface. And that's how you can create variables and share them across questions.